We are excited to be with you today. You are in good hands, I assure you, and let us begin. All right, so today we're going to go ahead and, excuse me, what just happened here? Okay, here we go. Sorry, guys. Okay, so here we are. We're going to learn about the networks of exchange from period 3, which is 600 to 1450. And the reason why I chose this one to teach you a week away from the AP exam is because AP loves to have they love it when things interact. And when things interact, that's when AP likes to ask you lots of questions. And in period 3, this is a huge time for interaction when it comes to exchange. So be aware that period 3 is probably the most, I should say, students probably don't know period 3 as well as they should. And it shows on most of the teachers' reports that period 3 is what students need to learn the most of. So we're going to discuss that today. All right, so here's the Silk Road. And look at all that land and all that potential for interaction. That is what the people that make the AP exams, that's what they see, and they go, there's a lot of different cultures and civilizations interacting with one another. And so they're going to ask you lots of questions pertaining to the Silk Road and other networks of exchange, which we'll go into today. All right. So the first thing I want you to understand is that the Silk Road has high points. The first high point of the Silk Road, in essence, is during the Roman and the Han empires. So this is between 1 and 200 CE. This is where the Silk Road gets its original name. This allows the Silk Road to become viable because you have two major empires, the Roman and the Han, who are controlling this trade and are trying to keep the road safe. And as long as the Silk Road is fairly safe, then that means that people are most likely to trade on the Silk Road. If they're not safe, people are not going to trade. And so I can see people putting Pax Romana. This is really good stuff. Yeah, you guys are doing awesome. So the first phase of the Silk Road, where it gets its name, is during the Roman and the Han dynasty. And of course, silk is the major luxury good that is traded. Therefore, the Silk Road becomes the name. But Silk Road is just a bunch of networks and routes across Asia. There's no actual road, in case you're wondering. So period 2, we have the Abbasid, the Byzantine, and the Tang dynasties. This is around 700 to 900. We have these 3 major empires who are, again, keeping the roads safe. And as long as the roads are safe, people are willing to travel and trade and make money. But as long as they're not safe, they're not going to do that because they could be carrying thousands of dollars of goods and then get killed from bandits and so on. So as long as the roads are safe, people will travel. And then the third phase of the Silk Road is the Mongolians, and they pretty much conquer the whole Silk Road virtually. And yet it ushers in the third phase of where the Silk Road is a major trade route. Let's go to the next one. All right, so one thing we definitely need to know is that on the Silk Road, whenever we're trading on land, you have to have like caravans, and you have to be limited in what you can carry, because if you have too much weight, then your animals aren't going to be able to move. and it's going to be strenuous. So always on land in this time period are traded luxury goods. So these luxury goods are goods where they're more they're built one place, but then in another place far away they're worth a lot of money. And so that's the silk. It's made in China, but if you move over to Baghdad, it becomes very valuable. Thus, a luxury good. And so we have lots of things going here. Something to remember in the social aspect of China is that women in China during this time, they start having a role in making silk. They're not selling it. Selling it's for the men because China is largely a patriarchal society. However, the women take a role on creating and maintaining, feeding the silkworms, and then they would even take the silkworm cocoons and they put them in scalding water, and they would unravel the cocoons that would eventually make the silk. So women have a role within this process, which is important to remember when it comes to the social aspect, which we know of spice. And then, of course, in China, if you did in fact try to expose the secret, that could be punishable unto death. So here are some aspects of the Silk Road we need to be aware. So in China, we're looking at things like silk, bamboo, gunpowder, paper. In India, we're looking at cotton textiles, spices, pepper. And then in the Middle East, we're looking at lapis lazuli for those who like their Minecraft, and then dates and nuts. And all these terms that are here right now, if you could remember at least three three products that were traded in the Silk Road in like China, India, and Middle East, you're gonna do great if you have a question on there. So all these products you see are just evidence that you can put on your LEQ, your DBQ, your SAQ to help you score more points. All right, we're going to talk about now the spread of Buddhism on the Silk Road. So, one of the reasons why Buddhism is going to spread on the Silk Road is going to be because of a man named Ashoka. He is the Mauryan king. Mauryan is in India, and he's going to convert to Buddhism after having this major change of heart. He was a bloodthirsty warlord in essence, and he sees the suffering he caused in Kalinga, and eventually he begins to repent, if you will, and converts to Buddhism. And then all his government in the Mauryan Empire all convert to Buddhism, and he tries to ease the suffering of people instead of inflicting suffering. So we have merchants also on the Buddhist in Buddhism. Merchants along the Silk Road, they liked Buddhism because Buddhism was like more universal. If a merchant, in essence, tried to convert to Hinduism, then they were already at disadvantage because the Brahmin elites were if you convert to Hinduism, then you had to already accept the Brahmin as elite and above you. But Buddhism, they didn't believe it. In fact, if you remember, Buddha rejected the caste system. And of course, another reason why Buddhism flourishes is because China is in a warring states period. And the warring states period in China was a very difficult time. There's a lot of suffering, a lot of death happening. And as a result, people were asking questions. Why do people suffer? Why is there suffering going on? And that was the exact question that Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, he also asked that same question. So this attitude of suffering or life is hard and Buddhism kind of go together. So during the warring states, Buddhism is going to become more popular in China to help satisfy those people's questions. Also, just remember in Buddhism along the Silk Road, it's not going to go very far west into Persia because you're going to have Zoroastrianism there that's going to try to block them. And so it's not going to really move past Zoroastrianism, although there will be some merging as well. And then also remember, because of the diffusion of Buddhism along the Silk Road, we have the Mahayana and we have the Theravada split. Let's move on. Okay, so this is really important to understand, especially AP loves it when you can see syncretism of things. Syncretism means simply like a blending of two things together. So we have evidence in Samarkand, which is a city along the Silk Road in Central Asia, that we have Buddhists begin to use the Zoroastrian fire or the eternal flame in Zoroastrianism in their royal practices. And so again, we see Buddhism and Zoroastrianism kind of merging together some of their practices. And then another one we see that is in Northwest India, and the statues of Buddha are made with him wearing Greek apparel. So I'll ask you guys a question right now. Why would there be Greek influence in Asia that would eventually mix with Buddhism? Let's see if you guys know or what you can come up with. Okay, I'm not seeing a whole lot. Oh, there it is. Alexander the Great. Yep. Hellenistic. Yep. All right. You guys are awesome. You guys are way on top of things. Great job. Let's continue on. Okay, so there's disease also that goes along with the Silk Road. And disease is important because it satisfies the interaction part of spice. So remember, you got the social, the political, and then the I in spice is for interaction. And interaction can be with the environment, and it can also be with disease. So during the Han and the Roman Empire, we're going to see outbreaks of smallpox and measles in both those regions due to the amount of um, of trading going on. And then in the second phase, during the Byzantine, Abbasid, and Tang, we're going to see the bubonic plague, which is also going to be known as Justinian's plague. Justinian was probably the most famous emperor in the Byzantine Empire, and this plague is going to wreak havoc on the Byzantine Empire when it hits. And then we have the Mongolian Empire, and we have the Black Death, which kills 1/3 of the population in Europe, and it also killed many, many others in China and in the Middle East. So here we have during the Han and the Roman, we have smallpox, measles traveling along there. It eventually will lead to both of their collapses because it will weaken the empires from within, and it will allow other invaders to take advantage of that weakness. Okay. Also, disease. The diseases that travel along these trade routes, they likely strengthen Buddhism and Christianity's appeal. So why would disease such as smallpox and measles, why would that strengthen people's appeal towards Buddhism and Christianity? Let's see how you guys are doing. All right, there's a couple of things I see here. All right, okay. So something just to keep in mind is that, again, with disease comes suffering. And with suffering, people are typically turning towards religion to find the answer. I mean, you probably asked yourself the question, that why question, right? Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? And so people, when they are suffering, they are more likely to turn to religion, And Buddha's number one question that started the whole idea of him seeking out enlightenment was, why do people suffer? Furthermore, in Christianity, you have Jesus Christ, who was said to take upon him the suffering of the whole world, if you will. So both of these religions have very deep undertones in what it means for suffering. All right, let's go to the next one. So in phase 2, we have the Byzantine Empire. And we have at a point, this disease is going to kill 1,000 people per day for like 40 days in Constantinople. The capital is going to get weakened. The empire is going to get weakened. It's not going to collapse yet, but it is going to get significantly weakened, which is going to allow Islam to rise up, for one thing, out of the Saudi Arabia desert and to unite all of the Arabian Peninsula and eventually conquer Palestine, which was in the hands of the Byzantines at one point, and then they'll be taken away from the Byzantines for a time. Keep going. And then here we have the third phase, which is the Mongolian Empire. So while the Mongolian Empire is going on, we have a pretty serious plague that hits, and that plague is going to basically kill about 1/3 of Europe's population. And it's going to put an end to feudalism. So out there, why would the Black Plague put an end to feudalism? Any ideas? I'm kind of curious. Who thinks they can know this? Why did the Black Plague essentially begin putting that nail in the coffin to feudalism? Less peasants. Uh-huh. Supply falls. Good. Less workers. All right. Less serfs. That's the key word right there. Whoever's writing serf down, you are on the right track. Listen, feudalism cannot survive without serfdom. They had to have a set of people who were essentially in bondage and tied to land, and they had to work that land. And as soon as the Black Plague hit, the serfs started dying as well as everybody else. But those serfs became more valuable the more that died and the ones that actually continued to live. And so manualism is going to start falling because the serfs are few in number and they realize they have more bargaining power. So as manualism and feudalism falls, then we're going to see these serfs and peasants are going to start moving away from manors and into the cities. And that's going to lead the way for the Renaissance. All right, let's keep going. Oh, and by the way, I just want to make this clear because we always like to talk about the Black Death or the Black Plague killing a lot of people in Europe, but it killed a lot of people everywhere. Like China got devastated. I mean, the Muslims in the Middle East got devastated, and their attitude towards why this was happening, the Christian attitude was very different, but they still were trying to come up with why is this happening? It's that why question, right? However, because of the Black Plague or death, it did give immunities to the Europeans, which will eventually be used when it comes to conquering the Americas. Okay, let's move on. So now we talked a little bit about the Silk Road. Maybe I can ask some of your questions right now. Let me see if I can find some of your questions here. We got quite a bit here. Looks like you guys are really concerned about SAQs and LAQs. I can appreciate that. I see some on thesis statements. Okay, so there's really not a lot here going on for the Silk Road, but a lot of questions on context. Okay. Uh-huh. So somebody here is asking, why are land-based trade routes less common in the next period, which would be period 4? And I mean, there's a couple reasons why, but one, you have to remember that after the Byzantine Empire is going to get conquered by the Ottoman Turks, then the Ottoman Turks are going to close off a lot of trading that went on. They're going to close off the goods from the east. The Black Sea trade is going to get closed off. And so the Silk Road is not really viable for people who are living in Western Europe. So, because of that, they're going to now seek for a way to the east by ship. And kings and queens are willing to pay a lot of money, and you make a lot of people happy and rich and famous if they can find a new way to get to there. Because of the Ottoman Turks who conquered the Byzantines, the Western Europe didn't have another Christian nation that they can sort of chummy up with, and the Ottoman Turks did not like the West. So that's one reason. Another reason is that if you trade with ships, you just have a larger capacity to carry goods. And that's important. That's one of the reasons why with Indian Ocean trading, we don't only just have luxury goods, but we have bulk goods. And bulk goods come in many fashions, which will continue on. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue here. Great questions, everybody. Let's move on. Okay, so here we have Indian Ocean, we got luxury goods, we got silk, spice, lapis lazuli, but now we have bulk goods. And bulk goods can come in like sugar, rice, timber, wheat. Bulk goods are things that they're found in many different places. Like China for the longest time had silk, and they're the only ones that created it. So when you went outside of China, silk, the further you went outside, the more valuable silk became. But bulk goods, they're just regular goods. But if you have a lot of it in your country and you can ship it somewhere, then you can still make a profit, which by boat, that is a pretty that's an easier thing to do than by caravan. So one thing we have to remember about the Indian Ocean is that India had monsoons. And this is very critical to understand because the Indian monsoons are kind of what make the Indian Ocean possible. Okay? You had two monsoon seasons. You had the winter monsoon season, which was dry and came from the north across the Himalayas, and then you had the summer monsoon or the wet monsoon season that came from the equator. And these monsoons were predictable. People knew that these monsoons were going to happen. They happened virtually every year. So merchants could plan their voyages based on these monsoons. And that's very important if you are a traveler to know when you can and can't leave, especially as a sailor who is so reliant upon wind. To be able to have a wind that is predictable and you can count on to get home faster, that's a very powerful thing. So guys, I'll ask you another question. So the monsoon seasons are a predictable natural phenomenon that made the Indian Ocean and India extremely powerful and rich. What other national physical phenomena made other empires rich or powerful in history? What say you? I'm curious to see what you guys think. Is there a connection in history here to any other area in history? I see the Nile River flooding, mines, Nile. Wow, yeah. Okay. Okay. Wow. Okay. Whew, that's a lot. So yeah, I like what you guys are going here. So just to remember that the Nile River, it too was also predictable And AP loves it when you can make connections outside of the period that you're writing about. So yeah, the Tigris Euphrates was not predictable in their flooding, and they were often violent, and it destroyed a lot of crops. But the Nile River, because it was predictable and it was a gentle flooding, then the Egyptians would just wait till that flood hit, and then they had enough belief or enough confidence that it wouldn't flood again. So then they would plant their crops, because some people would plant the crops and those problems would, and then if the river flooded, then you had a big problem, and all the crops you planted and all that work you did was lost and destroyed. So because the Nile River was predictable in its flooding, it made Egypt very powerful, just as the predictable wind patterns of the monsoon season in India made the Indian Ocean trade and India very powerful. You guys are awesome. Let's continue on. Okay, so here's the Indian Ocean trade routes. You have over here China and Southeast China over this region. Of course, you have India, who is the centerpiece of this whole exchange, and then you have the western side with the Middle East and the Swahili city states. Continue on. Okay, so here are a few things that you can just sort of check off in your brain a little bit. Maybe know one from each region if you can, because it'll go a long way on the AP exam. Again, as an AP reader, when I'm reading LEQs, DBQs, SAQs, I'm looking for specific things like frankincense, ivory from East Africa, olive oil from Mediterranean, because those are specific pieces of evidence that can support your arguments. So just try to check off a few here that you can be able to say, yeah, this region came from here, like Southeast Asia. Definitely you're going to have nutmeg, which is going to be a big one in cloves, etc. All right, so let's look at some of the transformations that occur in the Indian Ocean. So we have the Indian Ocean, and during the Song and Tang dynasty, we start seeing that sea trade is going to just explode. Okay, and one of the couple reasons is that China is going to have some pretty powerful inventions occurring. One is junks, which are these massive, beautiful Chinese ships. And then the second one is the magnetic compass. And the magnetic compass is going to be a forever game changer in how sailors will navigate the ocean. Next, you also have at the end of period 3, when the Ming dynasty comes in after the collapse of the Yuan dynasty, there's going to be a traveler by the name of Zheng He, and he is going to travel all the way to Africa. He's going to travel all throughout the Indian Ocean. He's going to make records and maps of his travels, and he is going to be he's going to make China be a presence in the Indian Ocean while he was under the tutelage of Emperor Yanglei. Now, the Ming Dynasty in period 4, mysteriously, is going to destroy all of Zheng He's records and travel papers and all that, and they're going to become isolationists, which history has proven is not really a good thing for any country. But that's the fate of the Ming Dynasty. But at the beginning, the Ming Dynasty were actually willing to get out there and to interact and to trade, etc. So on the west side, on the Middle East side of the Indian Ocean, we got Islam, and Islam loved merchants. They loved it if people became merchants, because their prophet Muhammad was a merchant himself. However, China was not all that favorable towards merchants. Why? Tell me why. why does Islam love merchants and China does not, especially the Ming Dynasty? What's going on in the Ming Dynasty? Come on, guys, talk to me. Confucianism? Yes, and you can even take it a step further and say Neo-Confucianism at this point, right? So Neo-Confucianism is going to begin in the Song Dynasty, and now we're going to have Neo-Confucianism going forward, which is really just Confucianism becomes a religion where if you follow these ideas of Confucianism and some of these elements of Buddhism and even Taoism, that now you can go to heaven if you do so. So China doesn't like merchants because Confucius believed because merchants did not produce anything in society. All they did was just basically buy and sell things and make a buck off the people who do produce things, such as the peasants. And so remember, Confucius, and this is important, guys, especially for the social aspect of spice. You have under Confucianism, you have the emperor, then you have the farmers and the peasants right under the emperor as far as prestige and honor. Then you have the artisans, and then you have the merchants at the very bottom. And that is unique. There is no other social hierarchy in history that I'm aware of where the merchants were at the bottom and the lowest. I mean, they were looked as almost filth. However, they were often very wealthy as well. All right, moving on. Matthew Perry, who? Why are we talking about Matthew Perry? He's not till period 5, unless you're talking about Matthew Perry from Friends, but probably not. Okay, moving on, guys. So we have okay. So I'll just give you this point here. I was in a training with people who were training AP readers, and they started asking us questions, kind of challenging what we know. And I brought up in period 3 Srivijaya. And my instructor was so impressed that I knew this. So I'm just saying that I think Srivijaya is one of those little gems that people forget about, and I don't want you to forget about it. So Srivijaya is a kingdom in the Indian Ocean, probably around 6, 7, 800 CE. And one thing that made it so powerful, if you can look here, and I apologize if it's too small, but China loved trading with India. India loved trading with China. And going this way proved to be kind of treacherous because of mountains and physical geography that just prevented it. So traveling by land, too difficult. So then they would sail and they would try to go to India, but you can't go to this beautiful channel called the Strait of Malacca. And so Srivijaya, which is the kingdom in green here, they became filthy uber rich just by charging taxes to people who came through with their ships. And they said, if you're going to go through the Strait of Malacca, we will make sure it's safe from bandits and pirates, but you're going to pay us money. And if people said, screw you, I'm not going to, then they could travel all the way around here and then go up. Okay, but that isn't the case. So this is very important where you have a monopoly on a channel which a whole kingdom becomes very powerful as a result. Let's continue on. So in the Indian Ocean, there's some really important things that happen. We talked about the spread of Buddhism on the Silk Road. Let's talk about the spread of Buddhism throughout the Indian Ocean because, again, AP loves Buddhism. There's so much interaction going on with Buddhists, the Buddhist religion, and so it's just so easy to throw questions out there that are extremely relevant. And so expect to see a lot of questions concerning Buddhism. So one thing, there are two Buddhist monuments, if you will, in Southeast Asia. The first one is called Angkor Wat. And Angkor Wat is in Cambodia, and it was originally a Hindu temple. So I want you to really understand, there was a time in like times of like period 2 where Hinduism is starting to spread throughout Southeast Asia. And they build this amazing edifice known as Angkor Wat to kind of honor Hinduism. But as Hinduism declines in that region and Buddhism inclines or rises, then you see Angkor Wat being switched from a Hindu temple to now a Buddhist temple. And also, if you look over on the right, Borobudur is in like Indonesia. Okay, we have one of the biggest Buddhist temples that's ever been created at Borobudur. This thing is massively huge, and that just goes to show you the type of commitment and how strong Buddhism was in the Indian Ocean region and Southeast Asia. And guys, remember this, because you may be asked an LEQ, and if you can put up, that talks about Buddhism, and if you can remember things like Angkor Wat and Borobudur, you are making the heart of the AP readers sing, because they are going to be so impressed and so happy that you know that. Let's keep going. Okay, so we talked about the Indian Ocean. The last network of exchange I'm going to talk about is the trans-Saharan trade. So let's talk about this. So trans-Saharan is well, let's get some context. A lot of you guys are making questions about context. I'm going to give you context to the trans-Saharan trade right now. So Islam is going to rise up out of the Arabian Peninsula. It is going to spread by conquering for the first like 150 years of its rising up. Islam is going to rise up out of the Arabian Peninsula. It's going to conquer the Sasanians in Persia. It's going to conquer Egypt. It's going to conquer all of North Africa, and then Islam's going to go over the Mediterranean Sea into the Iberian Peninsula, and they're going to conquer what we now know as Spain and Portugal, and they're going to call it Al-Andalus. So that's the context of what's going on here. So all these regions, including North Africa, are getting conquered and are converting to Islam as a result. Now, because of this, technologies from the Arabian desert are now going to be diffused over to North Africa, which is going to make a very powerful transition in the trans-Saharan trade. Okay, so we have the trans-Saharan trade. Most of you probably know it's the salt and gold trade. You have the people in North Africa who are going to trade salt, and down in West Africa, and because the people in West Africa don't have a lot of salt, there's not a lot of salt mines, they're not really near an ocean where they can get salt. It's very jungle, it's very dense jungle, but they have a lot of gold. And so because they have so much gold, we have pounds of salt being traded for pounds of gold, and they're looked at as almost as equal in value, which is unheard of in the history of the world. So one of the reasons why the salt and gold trade is going to happen now, when it's going to just explode in period 3, is because Islam converted all the Berbers in northern Africa. I shouldn't say all, but it's going to convert most of northern Africa to Islam. The camel is now going to be domesticated in northern Africa and used, and that's going to be that's new. The camel, it doesn't originate in northern Africa. It didn't even originate in Egypt. I know you watch a lot of old movies and you see the camel there, and like in the Ten Commandments or whatever, the movies. That's not true. Okay, the camel was in the Saudi Arabia region, and then it's going to be diffused as technology to other areas. And the camels were really important for desert travel because they can go long periods without water, and they had very large and padded feet, which was good for sand. Unlike horses, when you're in the, when you're a horse, you're in the sand. Their hooves are very, they're very heavy. They're more pointed, and they can get drenched more in the sand, which makes it harder to travel. So camels are going to be a wonderful way to travel across, and it's going to change the whole landscape of Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is now going to get a lot of influence from Northern Africa as a result, which we'll talk about. So here are some areas that, well, here are some things I want you just to keep in mind. Is you have in the northern part of Africa, you have the Berbers, and the Berbers are going to change this for you so I'm more there. Thank you. Okay, so the Berbers are going to trade things like salt. Okay, they're going to have salt mines in the deserts, and they're by the Mediterranean, which is a salt body of water. You have cowrie shells, you have glass, you have dates. Those are going to things they're going to trade with the north, with West Africa. And West Africa is going to trade things such as gold, ivory, cola nuts, slaves. Ivory is going to be a big one. What are the Berbers? That's a good question. So the Berbers were the nomadic people. I just say nomadic, but the indigenous people of northern Africa. And so they're the ones that lived in northern Africa as Islam was going through and conquering all of North Africa around 650, 700 CE. And so they're going to get conquered, and they're most of them are going to join Islam as a result. And so those are the Berbers. They were not Islam originally, but due to conquering, they'll become Islamic, and then they're going to spread Islam to sub-Saharan Africa, which we'll get right into here in a little bit. Good question, though. All right. So in case you're one of those visual kind of people, these are massive slabs of salt on your left, and then we have cowrie shells on your right. So you just kind of get an idea of some things we're talking about. You can get that visual. Okay, let's go to the next one here. Okay, so let's talk about some of the empires that originate due to the salt and gold trade. The first empire is going to be the Ghana Empire, and the Ghana Empire is going to get filthy, filthy rich off of collecting taxes from the Berbers, the merchants from North Africa, as they are coming down to try to get to West Africa in sub-Saharan region. So Ghana's right in the middle. And so I shouldn't say all, but the majority of the merchants are going to go through Ghana. Ghana's going to say, give us taxes. They're going to pay taxes because they want to have that safety in crossing the deserts. Okay? And so as a result, Ghana is going to be uber, uber rich. So let me ask you a question. How does Srivijaya and how does Ghana get uber, uber rich? Ooh, look at that. Some of you are already making that connection. Yeah. All right. We're going to Uber. Yep. Okay. Awesome. Let's continue on. So I also want to talk to you about the Mali Empire, which is going to be a very powerful way for the Malians to get rich as well. The Malian Empire is just the Ghana Empire is gonna collapse. The Mali Empire is gonna rise up next, and they're gonna do pretty much the same thing Ghana did. They'll just be bigger. And so under the Malian Empire, a lot starts to change culturally. So think of that spice under sea right now. There's a lot of culture changing here. So Islam is going to diffuse to sub-Saharan Africa, and it's not going to be spread by the sword as it was before, but it's now going to be spread through a peaceful means of trading and just trading interaction with other people. So that's the difference. Islam first spread by the sword and conquering. However, later it's going to spread due to trading and interactions with other people, and there's not going to be a compulsion to join. Another thing that's going to happen is we're going to have Timbuktu, which is going to become the Islamic center of sub-Saharan Africa. We're going to have the famous Mansa Musa, who is the first Malian king, and he is going to convert to Islam, and that is going to show that Islam is becoming a very powerful force in sub-Saharan Africa, where you have the king of the Mongol Empire who goes ahead and joins. And he is so committed a Muslim that he performs the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca, because it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. You remember the 5 pillars of Islam? Let's go. And I think that's pretty much it, guys. So that's what I have here. I'm going to go ahead and see some of your questions now. Appreciate some of your patience. All right. So let's see here. Are there slides or notes that I can print? How did the Silk Road change between high points? Okay, I see. That's a good question. So David had a question. He says, how did the Silk Road change between high points? And so you're talking about the zeniths, right? That I was mentioning. So the Silk Road, David, they had to have the Silk Road needed to have major empires that were strong enough to control the trade routes to keep it safe and profitable for merchants. So as long as you had major empires like the Roman and the Han, or for phase 2, you had the Tang, the Abbasid, and the Byzantine. These are powerful empires that it was in their best interest to keep the Silk Road, the road routes safe and profitable so that merchants would travel, so that they would bring money into their region and that their economy would flourish. So when these empires collapsed, there wasn't a lot of safety anymore. There were small little factions of warlords and provinces that would rise up due to a vacuum of power, but it didn't mean that the roads were safe, nor were they profitable at that point. And so if the roads aren't safe, if the routes are not safe, why would you spend $10,000 loading up a caravan and trying to trade, 500 miles away from your house so you can make a profit if you're going to die or you're going to get robbed? So with these powerful empires during these different phases that I shared with you, they made those roads safe and they made them profitable for merchants. I hope that was able to answer that. How can I get a 5 at this pace? I will tell you how to get a 5 at this pace. Okay, I don't know what your work ethic has been all year, but here at Fiveable, they created the Ultimate Study Guide, and that is a beautiful resource. If I were you, I would live and breathe the Ultimate Study Guide. It is awesome. And they have for each key concept that you have to know, Amanda Duamaral went ahead and put video links where, in case you're tired of reading, you could just watch her explain to you the key concepts. So if you want to get a 5 at this point, get the Ultimate Study Guide. And there it is. I already see the upload there. Great job, those who are on top of things. Get the Ultimate Study Guide. Get the Ultimate Study Guide. All my students have the Ultimate Study Guide. Next. Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. A lot of people are just really concerned about writing. I can see they're asking, like, what are any tips you have for DBQing, LEQing? I think we still have some really powerful live events occurring that are going to go over that. So if you're asking those questions, I want to strongly recommend you just make sure you stick to Fiveable. I'm telling you, you have some of the best teachers who are teaching you, and a lot of them are AP readers, so they know what AP is looking for. Trust us. All right, I'm not gonna go into LEQs and DBQs because again, it, we got those coming. I can see those on the horizon. How is the roads and paths of Silk Road determined? That's a good question. So Francesca asked a question. She said, "How was the road or path for the Silk Road determined?" What a great question. So one thing you have to be aware that again, this isn't a road. It's not even really a path. It's a route. And you want to know what connects those routes together? Are cities. And so it's the cities, Francesca, that kind of determine the Silk Road. So, for example, you have cities in China like Chang'an, and then you have cities like Khotan, which is in Central Asia, and Samarkand, which is in Central Asia. And so people are traveling from these major city routes, and that's slowly creating this Silk Road or Silk Route. If you go to the into the in Persia, you have cities like in the Middle East, you have Baghdad, and then in Syria, you'll have like Damascus. And so all these cities that I'm naming, all these cities determine what these routes are because the merchants want to travel to these cities because there's a lot of money they can make. So to answer your question, what determines these routes? It's the cities. Good question. You guys are awesome. Yeah, I'm just taking a look. I mean, there's just some great questions here, and our time is almost up. So I apologize. I'm not gonna be able to get to not even have to. These are great questions, by the way. Um, let's see. Okay, so some people are asking about the Safavid Empire, and that's later. I'm not really going to go into that. Just remember that the Safavid, the Ottoman Empire, um, the Mughal Empire. These are gunpowder empires, so they're going to use the gunpowder to kind of get an edge on their enemies. Let's see here. Yeah, a lot of people are going into period 4 now. So I what was under there? I don't understand that question. You know what? I think I'm at the end here. I see a lot of good questions. Let me see. We do need to know what China is like after. Okay, so guys, when China collapsed, so China is going to collapse. The Han Dynasty in China is going to collapse. And one of the reasons, well, there's many reasons why it collapsed, just like the Roman Empire. I mean, there's so many similarities between the two. Um, but you have the Han Dynasty collapse. You got the Yellow Turban rebellions with the insurrection within. And so when the Han Dynasty collapses, you have China that goes into chaos or goes into disarray. There's not a government to kind of keep things orderly or safe. And then you're going to go into the different kingdoms that are going to emerge, and these people are going to vie for power and all that stuff. There's a great video on YouTube by what's it called? Oversimplified History, and I'd highly recommend they have a video on what happens to China afterwards. There's just too much to tell you, and I mean my time's up. But a great question, guys. You have been awesome. Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. I see such great comments that you've made. Really, if there's anything I can share with you right now is you just be aware that on the AP exam, the people who are writing the tests, they love interaction. That is why Japan, you don't need to know much about Japan in periods 3 and 4 because they're largely isolationists. But when you get to the Meiji Restoration in period 5, when Matthew Perry comes and forces Japan to start trading and puts feudalism, then you're gonna then they'll start asking you lots of questions on Japan. But prior to period 5 on Japan, because they're isolationists and they don't really interact with people, the only things you really don't know about Japan, to my understanding as an AP reader, would be feudalism. You need to understand their feudal system, shoguns, daimos, samurai. Of course, they had serfs just very similar to Western Europe. And you need to know about the sinification of Japan. And if you're not sure what sinification is, I definitely look it up. Um, it it has nothing to do with religion or morality. Sinification is simply the Chineseifying, as I tell my students, the spreading of Chinese influence. So because there's very little interaction with Japan, there's very little you need to know before you get to the Meiji Restoration and period 5. So just be aware of interactions. If you see a lot of things interacting with one another, be very clear that you can be asked a very serious question on that. And get the ultimate study guide. Get the ultimate study guide. It is awesome. They did an amazing job putting it together. Whoever is serious about getting a 5 on this exam, you want the ultimate study guide, and it's free. Amanda is amazing. She's really trying to help you guys, and I can really tell that you guys are doing great already. So, anyway, thank you very much for everyone's input. Appreciate you, and go get them. You got 1 week left. Okay, so study, 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 and watch Fiveable because we're here to help you.